Hilchos Shmittah v'Yovel Perek Chamishi, the laws of the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, chapter 5. We're talking today about how to treat fruit and produce of the Shmittah year. So the Rambam says, Halacha Aleph, Peiros Shvius, any produce that grows in the 7th year, Nitnu la'achila v'lishasiya u'lesicha, they can be used for eating, drinking, and smearing as an ointment, u'lahadlakas haner v'litzvia, and you can also use it as fuel for a candle and for dyeing. You can use it as a dye for material. How do we know this? We know this from tradition, because it says in the verse that the fruit of Shmittah will belong to your animals, to the beasts in your land, and then it says tiyeh. Tiyeh kol tevu asa lechal. All the grain will be to eat. So even though it says the word to eat, it also says the word to be. The extra word to be, afla hadlakas ner v'litzbaya batseva. It includes the allowance to light a candle and to also dye wool with it. So now the Rambam goes through each one and defines it. La'achila v'lishasiya ketza. What does it mean that you can use fruit for eating and drinking? Lechal davar shadarke lechal. V'lishtes davar shadarke lishtes. You can eat things that are normally eaten and drink things that are normally drunk. So if an orange grows in Shmittah, you can't harvest the whole tree. But you take off an orange for what you need for today, and you can eat it. Same with drinking, with wine, with oil. Kedin truma ma'aser sheni, the same way the laws apply to truma, the 2% to the Kohen, and the second tithe. Halacha Gimel, v'lo yeshane peiros mibriyasa, and you're not allowed to change, though, the fruit from their original created state. Kederech she'einu meshane betruma ma'aser sheni, the same way you don't change when it comes to truma and the second tithe. What does that mean? You don't change the processing. Davar shadarke le'achel chai lo yechlenu mevushal. Anything which is usually eaten raw, don't eat it cooked. V'davar shadarke le'achel mevushal ein echlenu sechai. Anything which is normally eaten cooked, you can't eat it raw. Lefichach ein shelkin achle behema. Therefore, you cannot boil any animal foods, because animal foods are usually eaten raw. Ve'einem mitapel lechel tavshil shenifsad. On the other hand, you don't have to worry and eat spoiled cooked dishes or moldy bread. The same way you wouldn't eat truma and ma'aser that got spoiled. There's no obligation to consume every last bit of it. You only consume what's normally consumed. You cannot cook Shmittah vegetables in truma oil, so you don't make it disqualified, because if truma oil becomes impure, you will end up having to destroy the Shmittah vegetables cooked in it, which is for no reason. But if you cooked a little bit only and you ate it right away, it's allowed. You don't leave them long enough alone to become disqualified. Halacha hey, any fruit which is designated for human consumption, we cannot feed it to animals, beasts, or birds. If a cow or an animal goes on its own under a tree and eats a fruit off the tree, we don't force her to put it back. Because it says, Torah clearly says, all the produce that grows in Shmittah is for your animal and your beasts to eat. No need to hold them back from eating. That's for eating and drinking. L'sicha ketza. What does it mean to use Shmittah fruit for smearing? So all kinds of smearing. Lasuch davar shadarke lasuch. To smear or to anoint anything which is normally smeared. Lo yasuch yayin b'chaymetz. For example, you don't smear wine and vinegar. It's not normally smeared. Avol sachu es hashemen, but you can use oil to anoint yourself. V'lo yifatem es hashemen. You shouldn't place fragrant herbs in the oil, because that's not a normal way of using it. V'lo yasuch b'merchatz, nor should you smear yourself with oil in the bathhouse. You can smear it when you're outside the bathhouse. The oil already absorbs into your skin, and then you go into the bathhouse and bathe. Shemen shel shvius, Shmittah oil. Ein chaismin by tanor v'kirayim. We don't use it to smear cracks, to seal cracks in an oven or a range. Ve'ein sachin by minol v'sandal, nor do we use it to polish shoes or sandals. Ve'ein sachin leise b'yadayim tmeyos, nor can you anoint it on your hands when they're impure. Nafal al bisara, if the oil fell onto your skin, mishaf shafay biyadayim tmeis, you can rub it in, even if your hands are impure. Nor should you anoint your foot inside the sandal or a shoe. In other words, kind of line the shoe with oil and then put your foot in. Opposite you could do. You can anoint your foot and then put on the shoe, even if it ends up smearing around. You can also anoint your body and then roll around on a mat to also line the mat with oil. What does it mean to light a candle? It means you can light a candle, literally fuel it with Shmittah oil. If you sold the Shmittah oil and you bought other oil, or you exchanged one oil for the other, in this case, both oils cannot be used for lighting. Because we can only use Shmittah essential oil, but not an exchange or something bought with Shmittah oil. Even when you use it as fuel, don't put it into a bonfire, only put it into a small candle. What does it mean you can dye wool with it? Herbs or plants that are used for dyeing. Even if they're usually eaten by human beings, we can use them as dye for clothing that are worn by humans. But we cannot dye things for an animal from Shmittah fruit, even if what you're using are herbs or fodder that are usually used for animal food. Because the sanctity of Shmittah does not associate or does not take effect over dye for animals, and therefore you're kind of exiting, you're leaving the space of Shmittah sanctity, which is not allowed. Halacha Yud, Mine Kibusim, types of detergents, materials used for detergents, like soap and aloe, that's a plant that was also used as a soap. Kedushas Shviyas Chala Aleyan, the sanctity of Shmittah takes effect on them, and you can use them to launder clothing. Shenemar, because it says, V'hoisa Shabbos ha'aretz lachem, the rest of the land should also bring you benefit. L'chol tzarchechem, means you can use it for all your needs. Aval ein mechabsin b'peiris shviyas, but we cannot use the actual fruit as a laundering detergent. Ve'ein eisim mehem melugma, nor can we make from them a compress, like a band-aid. Shenemar, because it says, V'hoisa Shabbos ha'aretz lachem la'ochla, the resting of the land will be for you, but only for you to eat. V'leile malugma, not for bandages. V'leile ziluf, not for sprinkling as an air freshener. V'leile haki, not to be used as a induction of throwing up, of vomiting. V'leile mishra, not for soaking flax. V'leile kvisa, not for laundry. So no fruit of Shmittah can be used for laundry. If it's a detergent, if it's a laundering agent, like a plant that's used for soap, that's okay. But just to make soap out of orange, whatever, not allowed. Yud Aleph, Klal Gadol Amru B'Peiris Shviyas. The sages gave a great rule that relates to the fruit of Shmittah. Kol shu meyuchad l'maychal adam. Any fruit that's designated for human consumption, like wheat and figs and grapes and the like, cannot be turned into a bandage or a compress, even for a person. Same verse, for you to eat. Kol shu meyuchad lachem. Whatever is designated for you, should be used for eating, not for medication, not for medicinal purposes. But whatever is not usually used for human consumption, like soft thorns and soft thistles, different thorns that nobody's going to eat, they can be used in the creation of a compress or a bandage for a person. But even there, not for animals. Any plants that are not designated specifically for human consumption or not, I'm translating these as ArtScroll does. Sia is the pennyroyal plant, Ezev is the hyssop plant, and cornus is the savory plant. Here he says differently. He says zatar, oregano, and thyme. But their point is that they're not designated for either use. It depends on your intent. If you wanted to use it as fuel, it could be used as fuel. If you wanted to use it for eating, it's like fruit. If something is designated for both animal fodder and human consumption, we put the stringencies of the human consumption food, which means you cannot make a bandage out of it. We also put upon it the stringencies of animal food, in which you cannot boil it. It's permitted to sell animal food and human food to buy other human food. But you cannot sell animal food to buy other animal food. Needless to say, you cannot sell human food to buy animal food. If you did buy or you did exchange human food for animal food, they retain the sanctity of the human food, in which they cannot be used as a bandage for humans. Today, band-aids are all manufactured, but in those days they used to make compresses out of using different herbs and it would sit on the skin and it would heal it. That's the whole point of all these halachas. Yud Gimel Peiris Shvius. Any Shmittah fruit, Ein Moitziin Eisam Miha'aretz L'chutz Ha'aretz, may not be taken out from Israel to outside of Israel. Va'afilu L'Suria, even to the Syria area right next to Israel. You cannot feed them to a guy or to a worker. But if he was working for you for a set time, for a week, for a year, for a month, or part of the contract was that the employer took upon himself to pay food, the worker is converted into a household member and can be fed Shmittah food. One is also allowed to feed his guests Shmittah fruit. Yudalit. When the court sometimes would have to allocate funds for a woman's support, let's say her husband left on a long trip and he doesn't come back, he didn't leave adequate funds, so the court would allocate these funds. They should not allocate Shmittah fruit. It's like paying back your debt with Shmittah fruit, which you don't do. But she can get paid from Shmittah fruit of her husband. That's literally taking from her husband's possessions, totally fine. Tesvav. We cannot gather in Shmittah fruit when they are unripe. Because it says you have to eat its produce. It can only be eaten when it's full produce. You can eat a little bit while it's in the field unripe, like you would do any other year. But never take food into your home until they reach a third of their growth, which is the usual, what we call phase of tithing, at which point if you would harvest it, you would have to tithe it. And at what point can you eat fruit of a tree? In the field on Shmittah, so he says unripe figs, once they become a little shiny on the surface, you can eat it together with bread in the field. And the same applies to all similar situations. Unripe grapes. Once, if you would squeeze it, it would produce a little liquid, you can eat it in the field. And the same thing for that. Olives. The moment that a sa'ah of olives will bring you a revius of oil, so they're a little bit ripe, you can split open the olives and eat them in the field. If they're already producing a half a leg, you can squeeze them and anoint them, smear them on your body in the field. If they can produce a third of the amount that they ordinarily produce, you can already bring it into your house because they've reached the phase of their tithing. One can chop down trees for the wood on Shmittah before fruit grows on them. But once the fruit begins to grow, no cutting it down. Because you're destroying the food. And it says you have to eat it. You have to eat it. It has to be for you for eating. Not to destroy. On the other hand, if they already produced so much fruit, that the fruit already reached the phase of tithing, you're allowed to cut it down. It's already produced its fruit, and the laws of Shmittah are revoked from it. So give us a little more detail. What exactly is the point at which you cannot harvest a tree on Shmittah? When is the fruit already considered big enough? So the Rambam says, we begin with carobs, once they begin hanging down like a chain, the longer fruit. Grapes, once they form a seed, a pit inside them. Olives, once they begin to blossom. Any other tree, from the moment that they produce a small unripe bud. We don't cut down clusters of grapes, unripe dates, on Shmittah, because it destroys the fruit. But if it's a type of palm, it doesn't produce full dates, it produces like these little kind of fruits that don't really become ripe ever, you can cut those clusters off on Shmittah. Yutes, no burning hay and straw on Shmittah, because it can be used for animal food. But you can use garbage or leftovers of pressed grapes or pressed olives as fuel for a fire. An ancient bathhouse that was heated with straw of Shmittah. They used to have ancient bathhouses, and under they would have these little ovens that would heat the water. So if you heat it with straw of Shmittah, mutar lirchitz ba bischar, you can wash in such a bathhouse, paying for it. But if he's an important person, it's forbidden. If we don't know what they're going to put in, if the attendants knew that an important person is coming to the bathhouse, they may heat up some other materials that are forbidden to be heated up. So it should smell good. Which would mean they would be destroying Shmittah fruit, not allowed. Chav Aleph, haklipin, shells, v'hagarinin, and pits, shemutarin b'truma lezarim, which in the case of truma would be permitted to non-kohanim. Ein kedushas shviyas chala alein, the sanctity of Shmittah does not apply to them. V'arein ke'etzim, and they're like wood, totally allowed to be used. Eleim kein ru'uyin litzviya, unless they can be used for dyeing. The hakoyer, hearts of palm, kedushas shviyas chala alav, the holiness of Shmittah does take effect on it. It is holy. It must be treated with the sanctity. Hatzeder tavlin shel shviyas v'neisen l'seicha tavshel. Today we have spices already ready to go, already ground up. But they used to put spices into bags, and then put the bags into the pot. So if a person ties a bunch of spices into a pot, into a bag, yeah, in some cases.
They call it like a bouquet of something.
Spice bouquet?
Spice bouquet, yeah. They kind of, sometimes they don't put it into a bag. Sometimes what they do is they'll wrap it in some twine.
Yeah.
Cooking twine. So you don't have to kind of go people trying to fish it all out.
Ah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Think of like a tea bag, think of like a spice bag. Exactly. So so it's all Shmittah spices, and you put it into a cooked food. In batal taiman hare'elu mutarin l'chol davar. If you can no longer taste them, then the whole thing is permitted. But if a taste remains, they retain their sanctity and it cannot be used for just anything. We cannot put straw of Shmittah into a pillow or into mud to create bricks. If you did, it's like it has been destroyed. If an oven was heated up with Shmittah straw, yutzan, it must be let to cool off, and only then can you bake in it. Once the second rains come down in the 8th year, it's already allowed to have pleasure from and to burn the straw of Shmittah. It's so late into the next year that it's not considered to be endowed with Shmittah sanctity.